Did you know Napoleon won 5 wars back-to-back against the combined armies of Europe? Or that he developed the legal system still used in various countries today? Napoleon Bonaparte was one of France's most accomplished leaders and one of the most successful military commanders of all time. At the height of his power, he ruled over an empire of 44 million people and brought most of Europe under his control. He was consistently victorious, established a national code of laws, and brought order to France after its chaotic revolution. But he was also a dictator, known for brutality against his enemies, as well as contradicting the same republican values he promoted. Furthermore, an estimated 3 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives as a result of his wars. Before making his mark on history, he came from somewhat humble beginnings. He was born in 1769 in Corsica, just as France took control of the island. At just 9 years old, Napoleon was sent away to military school in mainland France, where he began his career in soldiering. Having spoken Corsican and Italian at home, he only started learning French at age 10, but never mastered writing in it. At age 16, he graduated from the Paris Military School and was commissioned as second lieutenant artillery officer. But just a few years later, the French Revolution broke out and the course of his life changed. The French Revolution had major implications not just within France, but beyond its borders too. Social, economic, and political unrest gave way to liberal reforms, with the commoner class asserting greater influence, as well as enshrining Enlightenment values of liberty, equality, and the rights of individuals into law. As time went on though, the revolution became more radical and violent, escalating to the execution of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, as well as the rise of the Reign of Terror and disorder around France. The monarchies of Europe worried that if the fervor of revolution spread beyond France, they could also be overthrown and their countries would be consumed by chaos. At the same time, French revolutionaries openly expressed their desire to spread republicanism and democracy throughout Europe. This escalated to the War of the First Coalition breaking out in 1792 with France on one side. The other side was a coalition, or alliance, of Austria, Spain, Portugal, Britain, Prussia, and other smaller states. Napoleon began making a name for himself by liberating the city of Toulon from British and Spanish occupation forces, and then violently putting down an uprising of 30,000 French royalists in Paris with cannons. He was rewarded with the command of France's Army of Italy, putting him at the head of more than 100,000 men. It was 1795, and he was just 26 years old. Almost immediately, Napoleon led his troops into northern Italy, where he won victory after victory against Austria and Sardinia. His exploits forced Austria to surrender in 1797 and give up Belgium, the Rhinelands, and northern Italy to France. He also conquered numerous Italian states, where his troops pillaged art for French museums and huge sums of money for the treasury. This was still only the beginning for Napoleon. To disrupt British trade in the east, he invaded Egypt and Syria with 40,000 troops. He defeated local Ottoman forces in several lopsided battles, notably at the Battle of the Pyramids. However, almost as soon as he reached Egypt, the British Navy destroyed or captured most of his ships in the Battle of the Nile, effectively stranding his troops in the Middle East. It was a rare failure for Napoleon. This defeat emboldened the powers of Europe to form a second coalition against France. Napoleon, frustrated with what he perceived as the government's ineffectual leadership, left behind his army in Egypt and returned to Paris. With support from 3,000 troops and some powerful allies, he staged a successful coup without any bloodshed. On November 10, 1799, Napoleon became leader of France in the role of First Consul, and although the nation was called the French Republic, it was now a dictatorship. Under Napoleon, France defeated the armies of the Second Coalition, then the armies of a Third Coalition, then a Fourth Coalition, and then a Fifth Coalition. In between fighting wars, though, Napoleon found time to reform the laws of France. In 1804, he introduced the Napoleonic Code, which is arguably his most impactful and celebrated achievement. The Napoleonic Code, or Civil Code, served as a set of civil laws for the whole empire, and was designed to be easy to understand and to hold everyone equally before the law. This meant no special treatment or privilege for anyone based on class or nobility, and that laws were consistent throughout France. It covered matters regarding civil rights, property, family law, and contracts. The Napoleonic Code is still in effect in France, although it's been amended over the years. Napoleon imposed it in the places he conquered like Belgium and Luxembourg, both of which still use it today. Also in 1804, Napoleon became Emperor of France, crowning himself at his coronation. Although still a republic in name, this effectively brought France full circle back to an absolute monarchy, where it started before the French Revolution. He placed his brothers Jerome, Louis, and Joseph on the thrones of several nations he conquered, and by 1809, almost all of Europe from Spain to Russia was directly or indirectly under his influence. Napoleon resolved to defeat the British through economic warfare, and to do this, he came up with the Continental System. He essentially banned any country from trading with Britain. When Russia decided to defy his decree, Napoleon marched east to force them into submission. This would be the beginning of the end for Napoleon and the Empire. In June 1812, Napoleon and nearly 600,000 soldiers in his Grande Armée crossed into Russia. However, he immediately began losing troops. In the first 2 weeks, he lost 100,000 men to disease and desertion. Complicating matters further, the Russian army kept retreating and destroying any resources the French could use, and Napoleon's supply lines were stretched to their limits. By autumn, Napoleon captured Moscow, but he'd lost most of his army along the way. He'd hoped Tsar Alexander would surrender by now, but it never happened. With winter weather fast approaching and no other options, he started the 1,000-mile retreat back to France. By December, Napoleon and a small fraction of his Grande Armée made it back alive. His campaign failed, and roughly 1 million soldiers and civilians were dead by the end of it. With France severely weakened, a sixth coalition was formed between more than a dozen countries. Unlike in the past, Napoleon was now frequently losing battles. In spring 1814, coalition soldiers entered Paris and forced Napoleon to abdicate, finally ending 15 years of his rule and 20 years of his military leadership. The coalition made peace with France, restored the French monarchy with Louis XVIII, and exiled Napoleon to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy. But as it turns out, you don't get rid of Napoleon that easily. Within months of his exile, Napoleon secretly escaped back to France and took back the reins as emperor, but only briefly. The powers of Europe immediately formed a seventh coalition to put Napoleon to rest once and for all, defeating him at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. This time, England sent him into exile thousands of miles away on the remote island of St. Helena, where he wouldn't be able to escape. He died there in 1821, at the age of 51. Rising from being a Corsican commoner to the French emperor and dominating Europe, Napoleon led an extraordinary life and left a complicated legacy. His military success and innovations, legal reforms, and bringing stability to France are only a few achievements that have earned him admiration. But his expansionist desires, authoritarian leadership, and brutality against his enemies are traits that led many to view him as a power-hungry conqueror. While the debate can go on about the good and bad of Napoleon's deeds, it's undeniable that he's one of history's most influential figures.